Let's talk a little about David Pakman and Jesse Lee Peterson. They recently had a debate that was featured online, and it's a sort of a kind of publicity stunt to get people hyped up for Politicon, but they discussed some very interesting cultural issues during their debate. And I would have to say the cultural stuff, I think, is way more fascinating than the political stuff because, okay, I mean, how often do we hear left-wing versus right-wing political bashing? How often do we hear liberal progressive versus conservative back and forth? I mean, we can tune into literally any single network any day of the week and find that stuff. But when you actually talk about culture and stuff, like, about kind of challenging traditional roles of men and women, I think those are the things that are actually much more interesting to discuss. I know very few people are going to tune into a response podcast about, Jesse Lee Peterson and David Pakman, so thank you for listening, and let's get started. To begin, I thought it was very nice to know that David Pakman is actually, someone just learning new things about him. I didn't know that he was born in Argentina. I didn't know that he grew up speaking Spanish. It's like you just learn something new about somebody. I've listened to him on and off for 5 years, never regularly, or else I'd probably know that. But, I've heard a handful of his videos from time to time, and I just, didn't really know that he came from a different kind of background. I knew that he was Jewish. I mean, his last name kind of gives it away, but I didn't know that about his kind of spirituality, which he doesn't talk about much. He sort of said, I think something that Sam Harris would have approved of when he's like, he doesn't identify as atheist or agnostic. He just says that he doesn't really believe, but maybe, but he just doesn't want to attribute any word to it, and he doesn't say that things are impossible. He's just kind of like one of those almost no comment sort of things. And I think we're going to be experiencing a lot of people like that in over the course of the next decade, where they're going to be getting away from labels and then just also having kind of more open-ended responses to things like spirituality. Whereas, of course, Jesse Lee Peterson is coming at it, that's where he goes from right out of the gate. He wants to talk about religion. Now, Jesse Lee Peterson, once again, I learned something new about him as well. I heard his radio show only one time. I'm not joking, not 2 times, not 3 times, 1 time. And I decided that I was never going to listen again because he was just so bizarre, abrasive. He has not the best speaking voice in the world. And a black woman called into his radio show, and he was saying some stuff about, African-American women, and she said, I don't agree with what you're saying about black women, and then he just said, you're a liar, you're a liar, you're a liar, and just started shouting over her, and I was like, I'm never going to listen to this guy again. But what happened was I heard his one of his earlier debates with David Pakman, as a YouTube clip, just like a clip from the David Pakman show. So then I, just decided, the YouTube, suggested, to watch the full debate, so I just did that. Well, let's talk about some issues. What on earth do we do about alpha males and beta males? What on earth is that? I'd say that this is one of the kind of very simple things for a lot of progressive people to understand, because it's like Jesse Lee Peterson has this definition that the only sort of alpha male is a conservative Christian, possibly even right-wing as well, but definitely just says you need to be a conservative Christian to be a right-wing, to be a man. And he really tries to get David Pakman on that stuff at the end. He asks him, what is a man? And this is the part where David Pakman doesn't want to answer, because it's like, I wish he had, though, because I love those things when they ask people, what does this word mean to you? If anything, it's just kind of an entertaining, thought-provoking discussion. And David Pakman kind of knew that it was a trap. He wants Jesse Peterson wants him to say, a man is just a male. He's like, no, a man is a conservative Christian who is responsible and has values and shows gratitude. All of those things that a lot of the conservatives talk about. But the thing is, what do we do with things like transgenderism? And I really wish that David Pakman would have kind of, spoken up more about this thing from the progressive side. He's really trying to stand back and just be like, I don't know about this stuff. From a progressive, I really would think that he would say something more like, hey, if this person identifies as a man, I'm calling him a man. If they identify as male, I'll call them a male. I mean, like, I don't think that that's like a controversial thing to say at all. Like, if that's what you want to be called, I'll call you that. Even Ben Shapiro said that at one of his Q&As when he was just like, if someone was born a male and then they had a sex change, and they were identifying as female, and he's like, if you went out to dinner with her, he would refer to that transgender woman as she, because he didn't want to be rude. He wants to be, polite. And yeah, okay. I mean, like, that's not a controversial thing to say, I mean, so I really thought David Pakman would at least come at it from that angle, because that's just kind of what we're dealing with when it comes to transgenderism. And, it's like, I was even watching that debate on Steven Crowder's Change My Mind, where he interviews a woman, and, she's now, she was a trans woman. That's what she identified as, a transgender woman. I really don't think that this was a very controversial issue prior to Caitlyn Jenner, and that might sound strange, but I really found that people who had actually gone through the process, like, they were legally recognized as a man versus a woman. Like, you were actually able to obtain legal status to change your gender, and that's just what it would be like. And, it's like so many people appeared in interviews and on talk shows, and they were just like, yeah, I was born a man, but now I'm a woman, and it's like that wasn't really, any sort of gray area in the legal sense, because they were legally able to change their gender. So it's like the law recognizes them as male or female. And, that's just kind of the end of that discussion. And then I'm totally down for the genetics thing, wherein it's like legally the law recognizes somebody as this particular type of gender, but the genetics don't really change, X, 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 Y. That stuff doesn't really change. So if you want to come at it from that standpoint, all right, I follow you completely there. And I don't think it's a very controversial thing anymore. And I think this stuff isn't really going to be much of an issue in 3 to 5 years. I think it's a little bit of media hype and sensationalism. But going on to some other things, these guys got into the First Amendment, Colin Kaepernick, and it was very interesting to hear somebody like Jesse Lee Peterson say that if he had an employee that, wouldn't stand for the national anthem or something, he was like, he would fire that person. And this is one of the largest things that we have going on. And I would hope some more right-wingers and conservatives can weigh in about the motivations for this. It's like, isn't that what freedom is all about? Isn't that what the First Amendment is all about? That you don't have to protest in any certain way? I mean, you can protest in any certain way, and you don't have to express yourself the way other people tell you to. And for the party that talks so much about freedom, and the conservatives that talk all about freedom and liberty, isn't that going against all of that? I do understand, though, that as a business owner, he can make his own decisions, but once again, you're targeting somebody only for their freedom of expression. And I'm not even talking about Colin Kaepernick. I mean, if Jesse Lee Peterson was somebody who had an employee who wasn't standing for the national anthem or the Pledge of Allegiance, and he was just like, I would fire that person. I don't know, isn't that contrary to freedom of expression? And that's sort of the whole debate that we have with Colin Kaepernick and the other NFL protesters who don't stand for the national anthem and they take the knee. It's like, okay, you might not like that, but isn't that the whole point of freedom, that you don't have to like what someone else is doing? It's like, it's a totally non-violent form of protest, and I don't know, I think that's another thing that really got blown out of proportion. I would say that Jesse Lee Peterson came at David Pakman in the absolute strongest way when he was talking about the wall. This was, I thought, his shining moment of the debate, because overall, he's a very bizarre public speaker. It's kind of amazing that he has a radio show, but his strongest point in this whole thing was the wall. He's talking about the wall between the U.S.-Mexico border, But then he asks, they do have this huge discussion on the wall in Israel and talking about, about something like that. And David Pakman is just sort of like, I don't really know if that's a good idea or not. And then Peterson is actually using his tactics in a good way when he's like, I don't believe you. You're refusing to admit that thing was a good idea, and you just don't want to admit it because it might look like, you're trying to justify something like the wall between the U.S.-Mexico border. And that was one of the few times I think his interview style of tactic might have actually had a certain degree of truth, because, it's like David Pakman is kind of good at answering questions in his own way, but what he isn't always so good at, giving kind of super precise answers. And even they ask him, what is a man? And he's like, I think of mankind. I mean, that's not really even... That's, once again, it's almost like you're afraid to say what you really want to say because you think of how the liberal progressive audience might look on you. I mean, or look at you, excuse me. I mean, what's so wrong with saying a man is someone who is male? Or, I mean, in the metaphorical sense, maybe something different, but definitely a male figure, 18 years of age and older. And I know Peterson's trying to come at it, saying it's also about, responsibility and gratitude and all that stuff. But I just wish they would have continued that discussion in an honest way where Pakman would have responded, because they asked him a question like, what is love? And, that's just such a... I was like, he could have really taken the chance to shine, and he could have been like, well, the Greeks have 3 forms of love, and the Hebrews had 2 forms of love, and, love means different things to different people. Maybe romantic love is just something that is formulated in the brain and is the response of, nerve impulses that are sent to, the cerebral cortex and, affecting the cerebrocerebellum and the brainstem and all that, and... Then you have things that are much more metaphysical, like divine love, which is all about kind of like what people refer to as mysticism, recognizing that you are part of the earth, part of the cosmos, part of the universe, and you all share the same conscious experience of existence, no matter what person you are. And it's actually all the totality of all human beings that existed in the past, present, and future will all be united through this massive sharing of, existence, consciousness, and our role in the cosmos. That's generally what people would refer to as something like that. And why didn't he take the chance to say something that could make him shine? It's like, I don't know. I just I've heard a couple of debates like that on YouTube when people just ask people questions like, what is your personal definition of love? What is your personal definition of sin? What is your personal definition of, the devil or happiness or evil? And people sometimes give very creative responses. I would say, though, that when they're discussing things about, Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, I mean, Jesse Lee Peterson, I'm not sure how much of that was real and how much of it is fake, because, it's like I said, sometimes his interview tactics kind of work. Other times, I'm not really sure if he is genuinely fabricating stuff. He calls Donald Trump the Great White Hope. He's also the guy, I saw this on a meme somebody posted on Facebook, when he said, we need to make the month of July White History Month. And it's like, I don't know if he genuinely believes that stuff, or he is just somebody who is kind of milking the spotlight. But I forget which YouTuber said it. I genuinely do forget. Someone was just like, why is it that every time a conservative gets famous, people think they're fake? I don't know, but that definitely seems to happen. It's like any time someone who's right-wing or conservative, or definitely the conservative Republicans as opposed to other things that are typically right-wing, such as alt-right stuff, but, everyone, people have doubted Milo, Steven Crowder, Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson, Stefan Molyneux, Lauren Southern, all of those people, people accuse them of being disingenuous. They accuse them of fabricating their platform. And maybe Jesse Lee Peterson would fit into that category as well, although he is nowhere near as famous. But, I really do have to insist that the things I enjoyed the most when they're talking about, kind of the cultural issues, in discussing Christine Blasey Ford, he's like, Peterson said that more men are raped by women than women are raped by men, and David Pakman didn't really call him out on that. And he's also like, he believes that she's just a liar because, he thinks she is. It's just like not a lot of substance in that, and like very, very bizarre and kind of off-putting. But this is one area when David Pakman definitely faltered, and the comment section tore him apart because he was like, Christine Blasey Ford had nothing to gain because of this. Well, she also had the GoFundMe page, right? Somewhere between $600,000 and $1 million was raised for that, and not to mention she had celebs like Alyssa Milano covering her expenses, and a lot of the things were also covered by the attorneys. I would say, though, to make a little bit of a pivot about Dr. Ford, this was one of David Pakman's larger strengths because he's talking about the Kavanaugh hearings. And David Pakman actually came at it with some good substance in this one when he's kind of addressing the elephant in the room about what about innocent until proven guilty. And to paraphrase, it's like, this is not a trial. This was not a trial, rather. It was a Senate hearing. There is no presumption of innocence, there is no presumption of guilt, and there is no reasonable doubt. It's just, somebody coming forward and telling their story. About Kavanaugh, on just a personal note, I believe Dr. Ford. I don't think that she is, she also passed a polygraph, mind you, but it's like, I believe that she was, I believe her. Okay, I can say that. I believe her. But what I think that was also wrong was the way that they tried to destroy Kavanaugh's reputation for things like going to parties and drinking beer in college. Stuff that almost any person that age would have done, even especially with a drinking age at 18 when it wasn't even illegal. I'm aware that the alleged incident happened at age 17, which would have been underage, but underage drinking shouldn't keep you off the Supreme Court, and they just trashed his reputation because he used to drink beer often in high school and college. That was unacceptable because, it's like they're asking him questions. Have you ever blacked out drunk? Unacceptable. And that was one of the things when I actually thought Kavanaugh was right to just ask Amy Klobuchar, like, have you? I don't think that was disrespectful in any way. It's like they're using this absolutely unfair double standard for the rest of humanity and Brett Kavanaugh. At the same time, though, I still did believe Dr. Ford. It's just like we had two wrongs going on there. Definitely, I would say that Dr. Ford is sharing something that is a little bit more serious than just a reputation for beer drinking. She's talking about attempted rape. But, Kavanaugh has confirmed it on the Supreme Court now, so that just is what it is, and it's like, let's move on to another day. Another time, another day, and, that's just what happened. That was the course of history. And most people were predicting that he would get confirmed anyway, just the way Clarence Thomas did, and Clarence Thomas is a bit of a different issue, because the allegations against Clarence Thomas were very, they weren't exactly the same. Some of the things that Clarence Thomas was accused of was repeatedly asking Anita Hill to go out with him. He was also accused of talking about pornography with her, and in 2018, it would just sort of be like, yeah, okay, and then what? But getting back to David Pakman and Jesse Lee Peterson, this is one area where Jesse Lee Peterson doesn't really shine very well. He doesn't really get the chance to give himself any sort of credit, and he's just very, very even disrespectful to women, and very disrespectful even to black people, as he refers to himself as dumb and black. Or black and dumb. He said that multiple times throughout the debate, and it's just like, that's just, that's in very poor taste. But on the notion of, what do we do about allegations of rape? And they were discussing this on so many shows. It's just like, so many people are just like, first you need proof, or you need, what did David Pakman say? It's like, believe but verify, or something like that. Well, I think it's a very simple thing. If any person in your personal life were to come to you about, an allegation of something, whether they were sexually harassed, assaulted, or even raped, as, horrible as that is, as terrible as that is, if, this is a person coming to you in your personal life and confiding in you, I would believe them, wouldn't you? Yes, absolutely, I would believe them. But to actually prosecute somebody, then, then you would actually have to have a little bit more than that. I mean, you would actually have to have, evidence, and this goes into an actual trial now, and you have to prove your case beyond a reasonable doubt, as terrible as that is. And yes, there is victim shaming. That's what the Me Too movement was all about. It was just like people were afraid to come forward, not only because they were afraid to challenge people who had a high level of like very famous people, celebrities, and people who were in positions of power like politicians. That was, sort of the heart and soul of the Me Too movement. But also people wanted to challenge, just the establishment. Okay, so I think it's very simple. If someone confides in you in your personal life, you should believe them. Proof or no proof, evidence or no evidence. If someone confides in you and tells you that they were raped, if this is your friend or family member, you should believe them. You shouldn't doubt them. That's such a very bad precedent. But, if it's actually going to come to the legal levels, then it would require something a little bit different. Now, moving on to some other things about, Donald Trump, the Great White Hope, as Jesse Lee Peterson calls him. They asked a question to David Pakman about what is something that Donald Trump has done that you like. And I even had to think for a second, it's just like, oh, wow. I didn't vote for Trump, actually. I didn't vote for Hillary either. I absolutely couldn't vote for Hillary. She was terrible. But it's like, when it comes to Trump, I was like, what has he done? I really had to think. And David Pakman gave something about his tax plan associated with medical billings, but I didn't know what, I wasn't familiar with that. I really had to think, what would I say? And I finally thought, NAFTA. He's opposed to NAFTA. He wants to renegotiate these things, especially the parts with Mexico. Yeah, it's a disaster. It's like, and a lot of establishment Democrats were also involved with things like NAFTA, and just there's definitely some bipartisan support. I meant to say Republicans and Democrats. The establishment wanted NAFTA. They wanted these. It just wasn't really a good idea. It's like as opposed to sort of a more global, or just there could be trade agreements can be handled in different ways, as opposed to things that only target certain types of businesses. But in reality, one of the things that I think David Pakman would have had to do in this debate would be a little bit more honest about women and feminism. Because one of the things that the conservatives have actually talked about is kind of true when it comes to the concept of feminism. When it's like, a lot of women don't want equal treatment. And by women, I mean the people in this, third wave feminism. They don't want to be on an equal level with a man. They want to be superior to men. They're not trying to achieve any sort of equilibrium. What they're trying to do is kind of just tilt the scales so that women are more dominant than men in society. And they're very open about it. I've heard so many women say this in my personal life about how they think women should be the leaders of the world. I was even reading a blog about that if women ruled the world, there would be no wars because of testosterone would be down, and stuff like that just isn't really acceptable to hear. Because for years it was all about trying to achieve a sort of egalitarian worldview. But in reality, they're just totally exploiting these things to try and put men down so they can prop women up, just for arbitrary power tripping. And that's what most of these things are that they were discussing, Peterson and Pakman. Arbitrary power tripping, it's just like, you want to have power over various social groups. But yeah, they definitely need to identify that with feminism. I've never met one single woman in my life that wants to be on equal par with a man. Do they really want men to hit them in self-defense? Do they really want men to stop opening doors for them? Do they really want men to stop buying them dinner and paying the bill at the end of the night and such? So many women do not want that, and they want those things to stay, but they also want women to become the leaders of the world. So once again, to kind of tilt the scales into this sort of arbitrary power-tripping dominance scheme, which is not going to be an absolute disaster. The other thing to say about that is, for years, we actually had a lot of things like that in cultures all around the world, where it's this notion of the woman plays her role, but she actually controls the strings of a marriage, and she'll tell the husband what to do, and then he'll go out and do it. It's once again, the woman pretends to be domestic and just pretends to be somewhat of an inferior, but she actually controls the entirety of the marriage. I believe Jordan Peterson even said that women control the markets. They make 80% of the consumer choices. It's just very, very deeply ingrained. But what's actually happening is, in terms of men's rights, men are sort of recognizing, hey, I don't need a woman to do those things for me. I can do everything on my own. And women are recognizing that, hey, I don't need a man to do things for me. I can do everything on my own. So what we're going to hope is we're going to have a culture when we have two free-thinking partners in a marriage and they just use each other for good sex. Here's hoping. Well, that's all for me now. Thanks for listening. Until next time.